Welcome, everybody, to our third week of Freaky Tiki. Last week, we discussed the golden age of Tiki, following the successes of Don the Beachcomber, Trader Vic, Steve Crane. Tonight, we'll be discussing what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how a whole genre of cocktail was really saved by a few boozy anthropologists. And I want to actually start off with a quote from one of these Tiki revivalists. His name is Sven Kirsten, saying, quote, "Nowadays, through internet, television, and documentaries, we've become very aware that paradise on Earth does not exist. Even these South Seas islands have their own complex problems and set of rules that were not as idyllic as the Western world wanted them to be. But the human being created this illusion because it has an innate need to believe in paradise on Earth." End quote. So Sven wrote that in the 90s, but he's really talking about the reality that everyone is facing a few years earlier, which is the fact that tiki bars are losing their popularity. In the 60s, it was slowing down, and they were outright just closing in the 70s. Polynesian pop is dead. It's no longer part of the gestalt, the zeitgeist, if you want to say. The same drinkers that were searching for adventure and mystery in Hollywood and the Bay Area, like on a family-friendly visit to Hawaii, drinking mocktails out of coconuts at a luau. And during the Vietnam War, many young Americans were forced to fight in the very environments that were deified as exotic and interesting. And when they came back home, if they came back home, there were very little mysteries left to explore. You know, counterculture arrives, and the exotic otherness loses its appeal entirely. Beach Bum Barry, Jeff Barry, who we were talking about briefly last week, he has a great quote about this, saying that the rise of counterculture was the rise against cocktail culture. You know, cocktails are what your parents drink, your parents who voted for Nixon. So really what we're looking at in the 70s is that recreational drinking is replaced with recreational drugs. Instead of drinking Mai Tais and martinis, now you're smoking doobies and doing LSD, which is, I mean, it's fine, you know, different strokes, it's cool. But it gets worse than that, because in the 1980s, like by the 1980s, no one, like all the people that made the drinks are gone. They're all getting high. There's no one hanging out, and you lose. There's a gap in the history of cocktails, which is so it's so verbal. You know, it's a verbal history. Once you lose a generation of bartenders that know what they're doing, it just becomes a nightmare back there. And that actually is reflected not just in the back bar, but on the grocery shelves, because you start seeing like prepackaged cocktails and powdered mixes take center stage. Like there's an old saying, like even in the late 80s, like really late, that if you don't know how to make it pink. That's how the bartenders reacted. Like that's, if you didn't have a blender, you had no bartender program. Okay. And just to give you guys like broad strokes of what the 1980s were, and I can talk about this because my parents, who you know, they were young adults in the 80s. I remember very clearly my father saying that that he was leveled with just a shitty decade to like be a 20-something in. Because the 80s were a bad decade for hair, for clothing, for music, and definitely for cocktails. Here's some of the stuff that we have the 80s to thank. And this is not an indictment on people that grew up during the 80s, but just of the confluence of circumstance that led to this nightmare. So you got top of the list, the Long Island iced tea. Okay, that's you cannot make up for that. But then you follow that up with a wine cooler, with light beer starts showing up, spiced rum now, like spiced rum and diluted rums, especially like Malibu rum. We got layered shots. like the B52, which is just sweet on sweet on sweet. We got the Lemon Drop, the Alabama Slammer, the Blue Lagoon, the Blue Hawaiians, basically anything blue. The Amaretto Sour, the Sex on the Beach, the Slippery Nipple, the Harvey Wallbanger, pretty much anything that was sexual, like sexual in nature. Just very puerile names for drinks were really popular. And oh, of course, the Woo Woo. If anyone shows up ordering a Woo Woo at a bar today, they need to be disavowed from civilization entirely. If you're in this class and you drank a Woo Woo recently, I don't know. I don't think I can save you. I don't think there's anything I can do. Speaking of tacky drinks, in 1989, really at the end of this nightmarish Tom Cruise cocktail shitfest that we're living through, Donald Trump buys the Plaza Hotel in New York City and decides to close the Trader Vic's side because it was, in his words, and I want to make sure I get this right, tacky. Here's a rebuttal from another Tiki revivalist. His name is Otto von Stroheim. And he was a surfer dude from Venice Beach who was writing Tiki news periodicals, just trying to, these guys were like, these early on guys in the 80s and 90s, they were just they were archaeologists, they were urban archaeologists trying to visit venues that had shuttered and hadn't been refilled with anything, trying to find old Tiki mugs and look underneath and find the name of whatever place it was. And this dude was writing this really, really important work in early revivalist Tiki, but he couldn't get it published and he couldn't even sell it anywhere except for comic book stores. It's the only place you could read this stuff. And Otto had this to say about the diminishing appeal of Tiki in his day, saying, quote, "People inevitably use the word kitsch or tacky to describe Tiki. Still, to this day, it pisses me off. Right away from the first article that was written about me in 1995, the headline said Tiki Tacky in it. And Tiki didn't become kitsch until the 1970s or 80s, until it was over. And then it was looked upon as kitsch in the past, retroactively. So it wasn't kitsch in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. The Tiki bar was serious fantasy," end quote. And that's kind of what was lost. The idea of Tiki just becoming this tacky thing and how it was resurrected is really interesting to me, because the 4 or 5 or 6 folks that were really at the early end of this, we talked about Sven and Otto and of course Beach Bum Barry. These guys they're all like post-punk guys looking for somewhere to go, like, because punk was over, and in their opinions, like, new wave was over, and all you had was like corporate rock left, and they were looking for like a subculture of a subculture. They wanted to find their people that wanted to go back. They liked the idea. They were searching for a community. They wanted to be nostalgic for something that they had no original memory of. And in a way, they found that Tiki was the perfect space for it. And you have these guys. They're all buying all their clothing from vintage stores and from Salvation Army, just whatever they can find that's floral prints back then. And they're having parties and they're setting up bars in their own backyards with bamboo, and they're sourcing all these mugs. It's really lo-fi garage band stuff that's happening early on. And it's like the drink that we're talking about today is really special. It's a special drink, and it's important in the story that we tell in this mid-period, in the dark period of Tiki, and as it's getting ramped up. We're making the Jungle Bird today, which, besides just being one of my favorite Tiki drinks of all time, it was sort of it was not an early bird, this Jungle Bird. It showed up later, and it showed up in a place that we don't really talk about, which is Malaysia, which is also another reason I wanted to talk about it. I mean, when we were discussing the early spot before the golden era of Tiki, remember, like, cocktails were not happening in America, not really. you had to go to Havana or to Rome or to Paris to make a good cocktail, or to get a good cocktail and not be poisoned and not go blind from the stuff being made in bathtubs. And similarly, in the 70s and 80s, you could not get a good cocktail. People were born drinking and dying in the space that it took for people to figure out that a martini was not just shaken vodka. And the doubly problematic thing was that the so-called cocktail community, what little of it existed back then, you can look at Dale DeGroff at the Rainbow Room as one of the few guys actually squeezing his own juice, not making tiki drinks. But these cocktail guys, they thought that tiki drinks were part of the problem. They were. I'm not speaking for Dale DeGroff, but just the cocktail people felt that they had to get rid of the sweet, rummy drinks to gain legitimacy, which is just back where we were in the 20s and 30s. You know, rum and rum drinks started getting no love, and people just wanted to drink vodka in the 80s, and they wanted it to be colorful. That's why Midori and Blue Curacao became, you know, just appeared and were on top of the world for a few years there. Let's look away from America for a second, because it's a horror show. In Malaysia, there's a really beautiful drink being made called the Jungle Bird, and it's a drink that is invented by one man called Jeffrey Ong. Now remember, like, bitter is rarely a flavor found in classic tiki drinks, but it's all over the place in modern tiki, which we'll talk about next week. But just to give you an idea of how bitter is conceived of by tiki folks, here's an excerpt from Trader Vic in his Bartender's Guide in 1972. We had a few of them, a few gems last week from him. This is what he says about Campari. Quote, "Now I want to say something about before dinner aperitifs of all sorts, such things as Campari, Dubonnet, Lillet, beer, Saint Raphael, Amer-Picon. The best way I have found to enjoy them is on the rocks with a twisted lemon peel. Twirl them around a little bit. To me, they are all delightful drinks, very refreshing, and they can take the place of a lot of cocktails with heavy alcohol content when you don't want to drink so much. But I find straight Campari and Amer-Picon to be a little bitter, so you might want to add a little grenadine and soda to these, and then serve them on the rocks." End quote. So this is the dude that's saying Campari, which is a liqueur, by the way, is a super sweet liqueur. He's saying that's just too much for him. And there are very few Campari drinks in his Bartender's Guide. There's an Americano, which is a beautiful drink. Campari, sweet vermouth, and soda water. There is there's just a gin and Campari. I think you can guess what's in that drink. But he also has the Negroni, which again is it's royalty today, and it's like this cuddly classic. Everyone's comfortable with it. Even people that don't seek out Fernet Branca and the extremely bitter drinks out there, a Negroni is a comfortable place to learn about drinks. And this is what he says about the Negroni in his book, Trader Vic, quote, that this will tuck you away neatly, pick you up, and throw you right on the floor, end quote. I've never once had a Negroni throw me on the floor, unless it was my fifth. Okay, so again, bitterness, not common in cocktail culture, specifically in the tiki world. But Jeffrey Ong, when he opened the Kuala Lumpur Hilton Hotel in Malaysia in 1973, was tasked with creating a welcome cocktail to celebrate the new hotel. And it was served in this ceramic bird and festooned with pineapple fronds or charred pineapple segments. And it quickly became a source of not just like local pride, but national pride. Sadly, Ong passed away just last year in February. And when he did die, it was only recently after they discovered that he was the man who invented it, because he had left the Hilton 2 years after he invented that drink, and it had been misattributed to any number of people. And in fact, when I wrote down the outlines of this cocktail class, I wrote it down as having been invented in 1978, but it was actually invented in 1973. This is the work of 18 months of deep diving by a local Malaysian journalist who wanted to really figure out who it was that had invented this drink. And after Ong's passing, there were calls to formally introduce the Jungle Bird as the national cocktail of Malaysia. So that shows you like how relevant this drink is, not just in Malaysia, but the entire world, and not just the tiki world, but the entire goddamn world, everywhere. A Jungle Bird is popping up in restaurants. Like I talked about earlier, how the reason why I picked the Mai Tai instead of the Zombie for our golden era drink for our class was because you can find a Mai Tai on a restaurant at a steakhouse cocktail menu. But the Jungle Bird is starting to sneak up too. Like I found a Jungle Bird at a Mexican restaurant and also at a Thai restaurant. It's popping up in places where you wouldn't necessarily find it otherwise. And the reason why we really know about that drink is pretty interesting. If you like bitter things, by the way, great book, Amaro. This is by Brad Thomas Parsons, who has another amazing book called Bitters, which is a great book for learning how to make bitters. But he says this about the Jungle Bird. Quote, the Jungle Bird was first listed in the 1989 New American Bartender's Guide by John J. Poyster. But it wasn't until 2002 that Jeff Berry's Beach Bum Berry's Intoxica made it a bartender favorite with a cult following that rivals the Negroni. New York bartender Giuseppe Gonzalez substituted the molasses-rich blackstrap rum for the dark rum of the original, and that's the version that lives on today. End quote. So that's the drink we're making today. That's the story of the drink we're making today. It has been listed as having been made with Jamaican rum, with dark rum. I'm going to be using at least Cotton & Reed's white rum as opposed to picking a blackstrap rum. The most common bottle that I've seen out there is Crucian's blackstrap, which does one thing really well. You know, it's a savory punch, but it's an uneven rum. It has no body. It's not the best made rum, which is, you know, it does one thing really well, which is a testament to the fact that it does really well in this drink. When I put this drink on the menu at my bars, I would always use a white rum, and then I would augment it not with a simple syrup, but with a syrup that had some molasses in it. My first thought being I could just cut my molasses with equal parts water, but molasses is sneakily actually not that sweet. It can be really acrid if you have a heavy hand with it. So do be careful. Be careful with the molasses when you're making this syrup. It does need to be cut with a little just raw sugar, the Demerara, turbinado, any dark sugar you have, so that you have that funky hogo, that barnyard funk dirt to it, but also has some sweetness underneath it. And that's what we'll be doing today. I'll be using my little blackstrap syrup here. If you have a blackstrap rum, by all means, you're allowed to use it, but this gives you, I think, a cleaner experience, and it lets the rest of the ingredients in the recipe shine. So, without any other ado, I'm gonna, oh boy, if you only saw what was happening over here, I'm gonna transfer this into cocktail making. Boy, if the feed cuts out, remember me for who I was. Remember me fondly. Oh, yeah. Good. Okay, cool. Oh, I'm going to bring this down a little bit. There we go. Excellent. So, we're making a cocktail here. You know, the way you do in front of in the corner of your room. You know, the only room where you can get a good connection. Usual stuff. We have for our tools a tin, a jigger, a spoon for cracking ice, unless you want to use crushed ice, which is totally fine. I got my pineapple juice. I got my lime juice. I got my molasses syrup, like so. I got some fresh ice. And I got my, of course, my Cotton & Reed white rum. You may use the Mellow rum if you want a little more sweetness. Not cloying, certainly to an extent, but if you want like that woodruff flavor in the Mellow rum, actually does really well in this drink. I've done it with the white rum, I've done it with the Mellow, and I've done it with the Navy Strength, all of which are dope. I'm gonna go with the white rum today. because I want something a bit crisper. And we get to finally talk a little bit about tiki mugs because I have not made a drink in a tiki mug yet for you guys. Of course, I hope you all have straws because straws are super important when you're dealing with cracked ice. There are like 3 levels of mugs, very much like there are when we're talking about, you know, just like the history of tiki. We have an actual vintage tiki mug here. This is from the Orchids of Hawaii in Japan. And this was made in the 1950s. This is a classic hula girl. You'll see that it is, you know, pretty small of a mug than what you might find before we associated tiki mugs with being as large as your femur bone. But again, super simple, very well made, very well hand painted. You can usually tell when a knockoff tiki mug was made because the paint job is miserable. Then next after that, you have the revivalist tiki mugs. So this is a good example. The tiki mug I said under here usually has a print of where like the bar was made, where it was being served. And yes, someone's asking what the name of the book is. It's just called Tomorrow by Parsons. Here's an example of a classic tiki mug that was around for years and years, and then it was gone, and then it was refabricated. This is something that was made in the 70s or 80s. You'll see it has some good detail, but if you look at like the teeth on this guy, they're a little flat. They're not quite as well defined as you might find in a classic. And you can see because this was a repurposed one, there's nothing in the bottom, nothing on the foot. So this was just made for corporate love. Still a sexy mug, and it's not, you know, it's not problematic in any way. Realistically, it's just a really nice, well-made mug, and it's rock solid. And then you have the new version of tiki mugs, things that are being made today. And here's these bad boys. I got this in Hawaii, and you can see that it's very new. This is made in 2018 by a guy that actually handcrafts these. These are the 3 levels of tiki, in my opinion. You know, you have the classic, you have the revivalist, and you have the modern. And you know, I love this mug, but I'm actually going to go with the mug of its time, the 70s, when this drink was first invented. I'm going to use this bad boy right here. And I'm going to start measuring out my drink here. Phil, if you want to put that bad boy up for us all to look at, then that'd be helpful. But I'm going to start with my juices first. We're doing 1.5 ounces of pineapple juice. It's worth noting that early versions of this drink called for 4 ounces of pineapple juice. That's too much pineapple juice. You don't want to use that much. It's going to completely overwhelm this drink. Okay, 1/2 ounce of lime juice. It's very rare that you find a drink with pineapple juice and not lime juice. They work well together. Lime provides a little more acidity without overwhelming the flavor. It's just they're best buds. They work well together. So again, just those juices. We're gonna do 1/2 ounce of our molasses syrup, which smells delicious. And a little more. Yeah, excellent. Right in there. We're going to, of course, use a little bit of Campari. For those watching earlier, you might have seen my my Campari poster up on the wall. I'm a huge fan of Campari. Campari, not many people know this about me. It was the first bottle of alcohol I ever bought. The day I turned 21, I went to Marty's in Newton. I went to BC at the time. So I took a bunch of friends of mine and went in the car to celebrate my being able to buy booze legally and not just having to ask my friends politely to get me some. And I bought a bottle of Campari knowing nothing about it, but knowing immediately that it was the kind of drink I wanted to be known to like. I thought that the bright red color was just magical. It had its effect on me. But of course, I also was the same guy that thought that Bombay Sapphire gin would have actually been blue colored because the glass was blue. So I learned a lot along the way. It's 1.5 of the cotton reed white rum. So we got our white rum, we got our Campari, molasses syrup, we got our juices. We're ready to go here. I got everything in my little tin. Now I'm going to start cracking some ice in here. Again, like we discussed in past classes, you don't want to use whole ice in these drinks because it's going to change the way that they dilute in the tin when you shake it and also in the mug when you drink it. And I find that this is actually a really nice, happy medium for folks that don't want to actually crush their ice with a mallet and bag. But this is a great drink to serve over crushed ice, in which case you can shake this over whole ice and then serve it uncrushed. But I'm just going to shake it and pour it with cracked ice for now. I make no apologies. All right, throw 1 full cube in there to agitate. Put my straw over here. Oh baby, we're ready to go. Give it a taste. Oh yeah, that does not suck. I'm just gonna throw this all into my lovely mug here. No pun intended. And that is my very simple jungle bird. I'm a huge fan of this drink. It's a perfect drink for a mug as well, because what you will not see is the color of this drink, which is not cute. It's a very brown, muddy, red kind of color. It looks like a mistake. It's funny, I was making a batch of this last week as a practice run, and I served it to Cassie, who loves this drink. It's her favorite tiki drink. And I gave it to her in a Collins glass because I didn't have a clean tiki mug. And she said, "What is that?" And I said, "Just try it." And it took her a second to understand what it was because she had never seen it in glass before. She'd only ever had it in a mug. It just shows you how much of this world is visual. But again, you can garnish this however you like. These frankly don't last long enough for me to spend a whole lot of time garnishing them, but the pineapple fronds on the top are really nice, kind of pointing out. A cocktail cherry or a pineapple cube is also lovely. You can't go wrong when you're mixing this up, and it's representative of that whole middle swath of tiki history. You know, it was unlike any other drink at its time, and I still feel that way. I think it's a drink that is still being lovingly recreated to this day. And that's why I wanted to share it with you all, because I thought that's it'd be a drink you might not have otherwise. And with that, Phil, why don't you come back and join us, provided that I haven't lost you.
Oh, I'm here.
What's going on, baby?
Just relaxing, getting a tan, you know.
So I'm drinking this lovely cocktail. I think you're drinking a Bruichladdich, which is not quite the same thing, but
yeah, I went out shopping and I was gonna actually make this one, but I got limes and stuff, and then I forgot about the pineapple because
classic.
I actually had pineapple on my shopping list today because I was gonna have a pineapple right up next to me, so that's gonna have to be for. You have to save that for Thursday, unfortunately.
I can wait. I can do that. Are there any questions out there? I mean, I'm sure that I'm curious to know how people think about this. If it looks great, take a picture, send it to us. We love seeing the pictures from you guys. Demi, you guys have been fucking awesome, sending us so many cool pictures. It's a drink that is only as good as your mugs in this case, because it is a bit of a camel in a glass. But
that brings me to an interesting question, because there are actually bitter liqueurs out there that have recently hit the market that are not red. I think of Luxardo Bianco as being one of those analogs. However, I have not tried to mix with it myself, so I'm wondering what your opinion on using that in place of Campari. What kind of impact does that have?
So I mean, it's a great question. You know, I'm really good about giving you guys a few substitutions if need be. If you can't find the particular thing that we're using, I try to give you one or two options elsewhere. But this is one circumstance where I just felt like it wasn't appropriate. What I have here, oh boy, here's a good example of a Campari substitution, which is the Bruto
the St.
Americano.
George.
Now, Bruto Americano, you'll see, first of all, by the way, like look at this beautiful blood red color, right? And compare that to Campari, which is, as you can see, much, much lighter. Phil, do you know the difference, but why the color is different?
I'm going to guess that there's no red 40 in it.
Bingo, no red 40 to be seen. Unfortunately, it's not because red 40 became like, you know, it's not this difficult thing to figure out. Here's an example of Campari today and Campari of yesteryear. And you'll see there's a huge difference in the darkness. It's from the 70s, back when they were actually using cochineal to actually make this classically red, which is the same thing that they use in Bruto Americano. Right, so that's why this dark red stuff is dark red, because they were crushing beetles to get the natural dye called carmine. And unfortunately, in the 90s, there was this whole vegan movement that attacked Campari and called it bug juice. They were saying that it wasn't vegan and therefore they should change the recipe. So they did change the recipe, and now Campari looks like this.
How many crushed beetles end up in a bag of salad?
Too many, Phil. When is someone going to stand up?
Number of crushed beetles is too high.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about, brother. Bruto Americano is a stunning product. I really love this product. St. George does a great job, but this is the wrong thing to use in this cocktail because it is so tannic. This has imagine if you took a bottle of Campari and infused it with sandalwood and tobacco. It's very woody. It's very spicy. And that spice can overwhelm a drink. And I made this drink with this, and it just was not balanced. Campari has more sugar and more grapefruit pith and rhubarb notes, as opposed to the savory, dirty ones. So think of it as Burgundy versus Bordeaux. They're in the same country, but they're totally different regions, totally different profiles. You can't use a different one.
Burgundy.
As for the Bianco, I like that. The Bianco is nice though.
Oh yeah, I mean, what does the Bianco do to a drink as opposed to the Bruto Americano or even Campari, really?
It's a totally different profile. It has like a lot of bitter citrus notes to it, but I think it wouldn't even be right in this drink either. But I like using the Bianco for Negronis, because Negronis I just sub out the Campari for that because it works really well with gin. I think a classic version of the white Negroni is using the Bianco Amaro, and then using a white vermouth, not a dry vermouth, but a Blanc vermouth that's a sweeter white vermouth, and then gin, and you have the same complexities of a Negroni, but it's completely clear. Serve it with a grapefruit twist, put it on a rock. It's a lovely thing. But yeah, Campari is something that's been much copied to good and bad effect.
You say copied, and that actually reminds me of something. I was actually, while you were doing the cocktail there, I was feverishly looking on the internet to find this brand that I used to sell. It was a brand of, it was a red bitter liqueur that was actually
Cappelletti?
made by no, well, Cappelletti is a good one. It's a really nice brand. But the one I was looking for was actually a distillery in Brazil that used to make Campari. Campari, basically made them make the Campari for them for many years. And then all of a sudden, Campari was like, we're done with you. Sorry, goodbye. But they still had the recipe. And so they still made it. continue to make Campari with that old recipe, and they just gave it a different name. I was trying to remember what it was called. If you know what it is, let me know.
Well, there was a Campari cordial that was clear, that was sold many years in tandem with the red Campari. It would have looked like this, but it was a squat bottle, and it was very popular in Brazil. But I'm not sure of a particular older recipe. But that said, also before we get any deeper into the minutia of cocktail geekery, I want to thank everybody for coming. So if you're hanging on every word and you're trying to figure out a natural place to leave, thank you so much for coming and for listening and for drinking with us and for making these days feel a little bit more normal. Because even though I can't see you, I can read some of your names, and it makes me happy to have a community here, a little tiny community. Please check us out again next week, where we have our last class, where we make the Trinidad Sour. Make sure you have a full bottle of Angostura bitters. You need a full ounce of it. Okay, careful. Send us the pictures. Send word of us to friends and family so that we can grow. And other than that, just it means a lot to have you guys here. Hope you had fun. We'll see you next week.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, that said, any other questions, Philippe?
Adina was asking, have you tried mixing with pineapple in the shaker?
Oh yeah, sure. Like instead of or in addition to just throwing juice in there. I think here's the thing about pineapple is that pineapple is like one of those things that's actually remarkably shelf stable. I've made this drink with freshly blended pineapple that I've strained myself, and then I just used like Dole in a can. This was actually I just got this out of Dole pineapple juice out of a little tiny can that you see at bars sometimes, and there's very, very little difference. I think throwing cubes in your shaker will not necessarily give you. I don't think it'll benefit this drink in any way. If you're thinking to yourself that you want to imbue this cocktail with more pineapple flavor, that's not the way to do it. I would just say to add another half ounce of pineapple juice until you get it where you want it. Just make sure you balance it out with maybe a little more of the syrup. So if you wanted to do like 2 ounces of pineapple, make it like 3/4 on the molasses syrup. If you want to interact with pineapple in more ways, one of my favorite things to do is to cut cubes of pineapple as garnish, dip them in sugar, and then take a torch to them to caramelize the sugar outside like you would a creme brulee. And that's a really nice treat to have on a cocktail skewer on top of a drink like this. I used to do those back in the day.
Oh wow! Stanley's asking, have you ever added a bitter to this drink?
So you're talking about a non-potable bitter, because this is absolutely a bitter. But if you're talking about a non-potable bitter, like a dasher, like one of these bad boys,
your Angostura, your bitter truths, your
right?
bittermans.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't felt the need to do it. It doesn't mean that it couldn't use it. I know that I've done bitters floats on my past 2 drinks, so I think I have a bit of a reputation now for marring classics with my bitter palate. But taking a brief look behind me at the manifold bitters before me, things that sound like they make sense would be like a chocolate mole bitter. Wouldn't be too bad of an idea. I have a bay rum bitter, bay leaf and agricole rum bitter. But actually what I think might work is a spicy bitter. Like if you have a habanero bitter at home, or something that has a little bit of spice, I think spice really works well with all the flavor. Like if you can ever create a drink with a dish in mind, a culinary sort of companion, I would say like the best proxy for this drink would be a crudo or a ceviche. And I think of what goes well in a ceviche with pineapple and lime and a fresh jalapenos, like fresh chilies. So I think a spicy will be pretty cool. You have to be really careful with bitter and spice, because bitter and spice are both sharp notes that can be angry. with one another.
You're cutting out there a little bit. What was that?
Be careful of adding spice to bitter drink.
No, that just made it worse. Hold on. Don't touch it. Okay, tell us what you were saying. Sorry.
I was saying that you gotta be careful with bitter and spicy flavors together because they can clash.
Okay, cool.
Are we good?
Yeah, I got it that time.
All right, cool. Making sure I haven't lost power on any of these bad boys. Any other questions?
Adina's asking, is any white or gold rum good in this drink? Cottonary was not available over there. So what analog would you say is good specifically for this?
Yeah, I mean, you're out in Ohio, if I remember correctly, and it's rough out there. I'm intimately familiar now with the rum portfolio offered in your state, though I also understand the just the difference between one store and another is pretty vast.
Go back. Try again.
The reason why I am
It may be rubbing against your shirt there a little bit.
The reason why white rum is because I want to avoid added sugar. That's why I made this molasses syrup. So to answer your question plainly, yes, any white rum will do, provided that it is made with as little added sugar as possible, because you don't want to throw this drink out of balance. And like I said, I'm not wholly against dosage in rums. My thing is, if you want to sip a rum, a little bit of sugar, fine, I get it. But if you're mixing with rum, then you should really make sure that you're using a rum that is completely dry as possible. So I think
I think in general, yeah, staying away from Demerara rums. I mean, there are some white rums out there. Eldorado 3 is one of those ones that it's perfectly fine for most cocktails. There are a lot of things you could do with it, but it is a little bit on the sweeter side. If you can find it, maybe Plantation, that one might work. A little bit neutral, a little bit on the less sweet side. Although for anyone who can find Cotton Reed, definitely worthwhile. It's just having the first press molasses gives it a little bit more of that grassy, almost lightly agricole side to it. Just gives a little bit. Plantation I think of as being very good, clean, and very, very, very neutral, which when you need that sort of thing, and when you can't find Cotton or Reed around, it works. But
I would say even more neutral than that, honestly, would be Brugal. Brugal extra dry, no added sugar, Dominican style. It's almost too clean. I've got
sorry, I didn't catch that, Sammy. You're cutting out again. Sorry.
Should I take off the lavalier?
Maybe that might work. We'll have to figure out where to clip it best next time,
I guess.
But so Dina's saying that Brugal is being discontinued over there.
Where?
In Ohio, I guess.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I guess that's not because of distribution. It's because of that's a decision being made by the state, which means that Edrington is not, I guess, prioritizing Ohio as a Brugal market, which is a shame because it's a very nice rum.
Oh, that's a shame.
Rum is tough. Rum is a really hard world. We talked about white rum last class, just how it's been commodified. You know, it's really hard to survive in white rum, which is why it's really important for us to represent a brand that has a white rum that's worth fighting for, because it has everything you would ever want in a white rum.
Oh yeah. I mean, when it first showed up at my store, I mean, it was one of the first things that I actually bought as a liquor buyer there, and it just it just hit all the right notes. It's got body, but it's not like, it's not sweet. It's not super sweet, and it's not going to set you back like $40. So it's just one of those, it's like really solid, like go-to rums. But I don't want to harp on it because then I'm going to sound like a salesman. But no, honestly, I really do like the stuff.
I just put mole in the drink, and I don't think I needed it. I took a huge, and I'm missing now a bit of the bright, limey Campari flavors. I think again, I would, if you're going to add any bitters to this at all, which I don't think you need, something spicy.
Something spicy, maybe an Angostura or what you got there, a Tiki?
Spicy, like the habanero.
Ah, that kind of spicy. Oh yeah. Spicy peppers and pineapple go so well together. That's why it ends up in so many hot sauces. But it could be like just a nice blend. Although there's no need to be afraid of spice. I think if you blend it well, and if you use it honestly, like the strangest thing about spicy things, and I have a lot of experience with spicy foods and hot sauces. If you get the spiciest thing you can find, you get a bottle of like some crazy concentrate of like super spicy, like Carolina Reaper hot sauce. As long as it doesn't add too much flavor, if it's very neutral spice on its own, you can add it to so many things in the tiniest amount, and it's like adding like a little sprinkle of black pepper on something, and it just adds this nice dimension. You use something that's less spicy, you have to use a little bit more of the hot sauce, and you end up with something that's a little bit more you get a pepper flavor. You get more of a flavor from it, whereas you could just get a nice prickle. But I digress.
What else we got?
No other questions so far. I think everybody's busy tending to their jungle birds, and
everyone's busy drinking. That's a good thing.
It's busy drinking.
Well, then, if that's the case, I mean, I'm going to say, let's call it. Because these guys, they need enough time to make another drink after this. I'm glad that we got to make a drink made by Mr. It's being made just in America. There's innovation happening all over the world. And next, we'll be talking a little bit more about where we stand with Tiki today and what it could become in the future. I mean, just using skills and techniques and technology and trying to use other bitters, not just Chinar. It's a really, really cool place. He has been.
I keep losing you, Sammy.
Well, that's it. We're good anyways. So we're gonna call it there.
Oh man,
Phil, cut me out, man. Cut my feed, babe. I
cut your feed.
Cut my feed. Yeah.
What am I supposed to do after that? Is everyone just gonna hang out with me on the beach over here?
No, you're not on the beach, baby. I know that you're not on the beach. You're in a green screen, dog. You're crazy.
No way. No,
Phil, just cut the feed, man. Man, are you crazy right now? People can't hear me anymore, man. This lavalier mic is some bullshit.
No, it's the wind coming off the beach. It's the wind. There's
no wind here. There's no wind anywhere. I'm in a subtropical climate, Phil. Cut the feed.
What do you mean?
Cut the feed, Phil. Phil.
Okay. I'll get to it eventually.
I love you on this.
I'll put it on my calendar.
Cut the feed. Cut the feed.